Good morning. I'm Martin Brotha. I'm the only South African Presky member, and I'm also teaching film studies at the University of Cape Town as a film professor. Well, I'd like to talk about Ray cinema, and I'm very grateful for the invitation to share my personal experiences with you today. My first experience to Ray's sublime work was in 1978. At that stage, I was a film student at the University of Free State in Bloemfontein. And on a freelance level, I did some film reviews for the daily newspaper in Bloemfontein. Now, in order to really to comprehend the impact of array on a young cinephile at that stage, like me, it's important to look at the social political climate in South Africa during the 1970s. Although we were allowed to see films from America as well as Europe in mainstream cinemas, it was a whole different story with regard to world cinema. Um, and usually just in newspapers or in film magazines, one read about, for instance, parallel cinema, for instance, in India, the developments in African cinema across our borders. And there was a sort of a hunger to be exposed to world cinema. Uh, what also contributed a lot to one's appreciation of world cinema was the censorship system at the time. It was very strict, and even mainstream films got heavily censored because of swearing, of nudity. For instance, films which depict racial interaction in a positive way. Think about a film like, for instance, Darling by John Schlesinger. You also had films which got banned. Lina Wertmüller's Seven Beauties, Satyricon by Fellini, Novecento by Bertolucci, and the list is quite endless. Also, for instance, Casanova by Fellini. Um, so it was really, really difficult to keep up in South Africa at the time with developments in world cinema. Film festivals became one sort of outlet to enable people to watch international films from around the world. Only started in 1977, the Cape Town International Film Festival, and then afterwards festivals in Durban and in Johannesburg. But it wasn't the case, for instance, in a place like Bloemfontein, where I studied and desperately tried to see examples of world cinema. The only means for a cinephile to see films was a network of 16 millimeter film societies. And there was one in Bloemfontein, and the person who sort of took the initiative was Bram Miller, and he's still running that film society. And I will get back to that by the end of this presentation. The film societies offered cinephiles the opportunity to see quite extensive collection of world cinema. I remember, for instance, in the 1970s, at that stage when, for instance, Neo German cinema was quite popular, it was amazing at that film society to be able to see the latest films by Fassbinder, Werner Herzog, Wim Wenders, and Volker Schlendorf. For a young 18-year-old cinephile like myself, it was just amazing to see your first Angelopoulos, Antonioni, Ingmar Bergman, Bertolucci, Bresson, Fellini, Buñuel, Ousmane Sembène, Joseph Chahine, Glauber Rocha, and many other giants in world cinema. It was also about having access in that state of isolation to films from Africa, Asia, and Latin America. And at the age of 18, I saw the Upper Trilogy, and it remained up to this day among my top 10 works of art of all time. The sensitivity in dealing with a boy's growing up to adulthood and this whole depiction of relationships between parents and children, between fathers and sons, was really unforgettable. And the depiction of a setting by means of realist accounts of everyday events in this village was really sublime. Little moments, little impressions. Having even someone, for instance, like Sokurov, probably was influenced by that in a film like Mother and Son, where the son is also standing outside in the field and he's just watch this a train passing by, like the young protagonists in Part Upon Charlie. What also really appealed to me was Ray's humanism, his empathy for characters, even if they were flawed. There was always this compassion and this celebration of their strengths, but also the compassion with regard to their weaknesses. And he didn't shy away of the social political nuances in Indian society. If you think about a film like Distant Thunder, Days and Nights in the Forest. In terms of influences in South Africa, one of our directors, Ross Devenish, a very, very well-known filmmaker in terms of international community, won awards at the Locarno Film Festival as well as Berlin for his films The Guest and Marigolds in August in partnership with Abel Fugard. Devenish made a film in the mid-1970s called The Guest, and it's about the emotional anguish of a very well-known Afrikaans literary figure, Eugene Moray. And the austere approach to the subject matter was influenced in many ways by Ray and by Ray's sort of realism. And Ross talked a lot about Ray and his love for Ray's cinema. So the film also remains probably one of the highlights in South African cinema. It was a remarkable film with its realism, with its almost austere approach to subject matter in a time when South African cinema was characterized by melodrama and soap operas, quite unique in our own heritage. And I would like to conclude by saying that in 2006, when I started to teach at the Centre for Film Media Studies at the University of Cape Town, Ray's work became part of our curriculum, especially at the second year level. We introduced students to Ray, but also at the honours level. I'm running a course about authorship and cinema, and Ray, together with the likes of Kurustami and other giants, are being studied by postgraduate students. He's considered to be a towering figure in the world, and yearly South African students discover his work. And there's a lot of connection there in terms also of social political issues within South African society. And yes, to come back to the Film Society circuit of the 1970s, they don't use 16mm anymore. They've moved on now to DVDs and other means of distribution. But Bram Miller's Film Society is still going strong.